Hello, my name is Jessica Allerton, Deputy Editor of the Pathologist, and I'm delighted to be sitting down here today with Rohan Long, who is Museum Curator at the Harry Brookes Allen Museum of Anatomy and Pathology. Lovely to see you, Rohan.
Yes, lovely to be here. Thanks for asking me on to have a bit of a chat.
Thank you. So let's get started. Can you give us a brief synopsis of the museum? So, what specimens are displayed? Where are you based? All the fun
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, of course. Yeah, so we're the Museum of Anatomy and Pathology at University of Melbourne. We are within the medical faculty in the main medical building, and we are a museum. We're not open to the public. We're there for students, staff, and researchers either at the University of Melbourne or doing associated studies. So we are a very big museum. We're a very old museum. Big in terms of specimens. We've been around for a very, very long time. We're one of those wonderful old departmental museums that was sort of, I mean, the nucleus goes back to sort of 1850s when University of Melbourne was first getting started. And so we have a lot of specimens. So we have well over 10,000 specimens. That's pathology and anatomy. And we're there for students to access, if they're enrolled in particular in relevant subjects, their student cards give them access to the space whenever they want to. But then we also run workshops and pracs and tutorials and that sort of thing for the different subjects who need to use us. Um, and yeah, we definitely have a very in terms of specifically looking at pathology, because we are sort of we are two museums sort of fused together as one, so that they were originally separate up until very recently. So, like, as I say, this we're going way back to the 1850s here. So this is a very recent development. Sort of in the early 2000s, they brought the pathology collections and the anatomy collections together. But obviously, there's a lot of crossover there. A lot of certainly a very coherent group of specimens to have together in that way. And yeah, so a lot of involvement with pathology. There's always been a very strong relationship with the pathology department, and now there's multiple departments that cover those subjects. So they can access our space, and we also often provide them with specimens that they'll give us certain pathologies that they want to show to a class or a group, and we can source those for them and bring them up even if they're not currently on display.
Amazing. Nice to hear there's so much history behind it all.
Yeah, there is, and that makes it really it's a great aspect of it, I suppose, because there you do it's all very scientific, but there's also sort of a cultural history there and a social history. But I suppose that's always the case with pathology, isn't it? I mean, like we have I can show students lungs with tuberculosis from a local person. So you're not going to get tuberculosis in Melbourne today, but our collections go back far enough that we get these things that are very much very relevant to pathology, but also tie in really strongly with social history and with the history of Melbourne and of Australia. And I love that aspect of it. I really enjoy sort of highlighting those specimens for students and other members of the university.
Absolutely. So, how did you fall into this line of work? How did you become curator of the museum?
Yeah, I've come a really unusual way because I'm not a human anatomist. I'm not a pathologist. I have a zoology background, so I've spent most of my life looking at and working with and studying animals. Um, and so I got a job at the University of Melbourne just as a lab tech in the zoology department. God, that was over 10 years ago, was when I started at the university. And there's a zoology museum in that department. So this is and far this is not particularly common in Australian universities. Far more common in universities in the UK and in Europe. But I didn't even know they had these sorts of university museums until I was put in charge of one. And so I'd always wanted to work with museums. So I very soon realized I can get some experience here and I can actually you know, it's my job to look after this museum, but it was only a part-time part of the role. It was only a small sort of aspect of the role, um, and so I spent a lot of time getting as much experience and building up skills working with these old teaching biological collections. And then when this job came up for a full-time curator of a university, a departmental museum, I just jumped at it and was, really keen. And I was able to build, I built up all this experience working with these really quite sort of niche, obscure museums. That when the job came up, I was able to provide all this really unique experience that not many people had. And of course, yeah, I mean, working with zoological specimens, it's quite similar to working with human specimens. But yeah, I've had it's been an unbelievable learning curve. Learning about human anatomy and pathology. And it's been amazing. Like it's been absolutely incredible to have the opportunity to work with these collections and get to know this new sort of sphere of knowledge.
Absolutely. It sounds like such an exciting position. I know you've briefly mentioned some of what your job entails, but could you give us some more details on that? Is there any like particular challenges that come with your role or anything in particular that you want to
Sure,
highlight?
sure. I think the thing about the role that immediately makes me think I should so is that like it's kind of a almost like a one person role. So it's incredibly it's amazing to be able to work with sort of all the different aspects of a museum. But that's kind of the pro and the con. So the good thing is that I get to deal with sort of everything. I get to deal with collection management. I get to deal with curation, with working with classes, working with academics that are doing classes in the space. Um, Looking at exhibitions, looking at research, history, like it's so broad in terms of just I sort of have to cover almost any aspect where you might have multiple people employed in a sort of maybe a larger museum. So in that respect, it's actually really incredible to be able to do a bit of everything, and I really do enjoy that. But then the flip side is that it's really hard to do that, and there's always going to be something that you're not quite that you're getting a bit behind on, I suppose. So it's a good thing, but it also entails some challenges as well. Um, I guess what do I like? What do I like the best? I like collection management a lot. I really enjoy that line of the job. There's We've done loads and loads of work on databases, which I think some people probably think is like sounds like the most boring thing imaginable. But there's something about like organizing a huge group of things that I just find kind of perversely really satisfying. I mean, and like with the pathology specimens specifically, there's so many pathology specimens, and probably more so than the anatomy specimens. The pathology specimens often have case histories. They have, people and dates and places associated with them, which are really important in understanding them. And so it's been something that I've been really passionate about to make sure that we have that information, connected to those records on our database, and have that organized. Again, it sounds really boring even as I say it, but I love doing this. I absolutely love doing it. And the results are incredible where now we can really interrogate our database. And when people ask us research questions or they say, "Oh, do you know have any?" Someone asked me if we had any influenza specimens. They're like, "I want to study the influenza strain from the 1970s that came through Australia." Um, and unfortunately, we didn't have that, but we had the database in a state where we could really answer that question properly and be like, "Well, you know what? I can line up every influenza specimen we have right here, and some of them have dates, and some of them have case histories, and all the ones that do, we can get that information immediately." And that wasn't the case for a long time. So we're still waiting for those. I'm still waiting for some really good research questions that we can test out how well our new sort of database organization can work. But I do really love that stuff. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of staring at computers, which is maybe not what people would associate with pathology or necessary museum work. But it's got to be done, and I do like it.
Yeah, I think it's ideal to showcase how vast the storage is in a way, both database and what you have on the from all the specimens as well. And
Mm.
putting more effort into a project almost makes it more rewarding. I mean, especially from us outside seeing what can be done in museums like yours, it's incredible.
Yeah, because you can have the specimens, and we have these thousands and thousands of pathological specimens. But if you can't get what you need to answer these questions, then it only has sort of as much value as the database that sort of sits over it in some ways.
Absolutely. So, are there any specific specimens that maybe you have as favourites, or that people seem to prefer? Just anything about any particular specimens?
Yeah. I don't know. I think I was thinking today about exactly this. I think I've really been drawn recently to our we have a really big skeletal pathology specimen, and coming from that animal background, and even coming from I done work with fossils and that sort of thing. I really engage with bones and with skeletons and skulls, um, and the we have this really huge collection, and I think it's very historical as well, and that's again draws me to it. Um, and even thinking about that, like I think when we go back into those times, 1860s, 1870s. I know when you read the history, it was quite difficult looking after potted fluid preserved specimens back then. Like so there was all these issues with trying to keep this sort of tissue preserved and looking nice. Whereas I think bones would have been nice and simple for the museum operators. I think they would have been like you dry it out, you put it on a little mount with a card, you're done. And I think that obviously appealed to them. So there's this really huge collection of sort of mounted skeletal pathology, some sort of 1860s, 1870s 1880s. And I guess it's quite sort of gory in a way, but like you see these sort of injuries and abnormalities and malformations that you just wouldn't see in Melbourne today. You wouldn't see in any sort of Western nation. But it's all there in front of you. This sort of story of what was happening in Melbourne at that time. And I guess the flip side of that is also that there's also these advances as well, where people were able to move on from these sorts of injuries and still continue their lives in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do, decades earlier. So it's such an interesting time, I guess, in social history and also in scientific advancement. And it's this sort of weird story told in bones. And I find it so interesting. And again, they're ones where they tend to have these little numbers attached to them where we can actually track down stories and histories related to them in a way that a lot of the specimens don't have. But these ones are sort of from that era, but they did, for whatever reason, maybe because they were mounting them in that particular way, they all tend to have a little number on them, which we can track back to a date or a person or an event.
Yeah, that's so exciting that you can take it exactly back to a time or a person. That's so interesting. So I know that you've mentioned that the museum isn't open to the general public. It's very based on, supporting students and institutions. Could you tell us a bit about the initiatives that the museum does in that way? So for supporting educational services, engagement opportunities, all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I said that we're not open to the public, and we're not, but we try to be as sort of open as we can be with that sort of, with that security door in the way. So, we try to get as many groups in as we can and engage with them. We do a lot of work. We offer tours to school groups. We offer tours to all sorts of groups. We mainly get sort of late secondary schools and also tertiary groups. We get a lot of art groups as well. There's always been a really strong involvement with welcoming artistic groups into the space. For a long time. So we often have groups coming through. I really love doing that. Like that's something that I do as well. I'm also a tour guide on top of all those other things I was talking about. So um, that's always quite rewarding. I think we get these fantastic groups sometimes. The sort of late secondary school groups where they have a knowledge. They're starting to get a knowledge of these sorts of things in a scientific way, but they still have that youthful enthusiasm, and we're a big museum full of human tissue specimens. It's a really full on thing. And in a lot of those groups, they're amazed. They're just absolutely amazed, and they just can't believe that this exists, and they're getting to see it. And they've got a level of knowledge they can also really appreciate it as well and be like, wow, I really understand what I'm seeing here. And it's just that combination is really great. And I might just quickly talk about some of those artistic groups as well. We really love that aspect of what we do. So we do a breadth subject twice a year where this is the fine arts department at the University of Melbourne runs this. We basically just let them take over the museum for 2 weeks, and it just gets transformed into an art studio during the holidays when the other classes aren't running. And they do these amazing classes where they bring in students. They don't have to have had any previous artistic training, and they come in and just use our specimens as a jumping off point for these incredible artworks. And we love having them, and they love doing it. And the subject always always books out immediately. And it's a wonderful thing.
That's so exciting to think that there's, I mean, obviously with pathology and a lot of other STEM subjects, having that multidisciplinary kind of collaboration is so key. And to hear that, artists are getting involved is super exciting as well.
It is, yeah, and it's one of those things where even though we're not open to the public, I think all the artists know we exist. So a lot of the artists like to get they like to have access to those sorts of specimens because it's like really helpful for their craft, and they all seem to know about us. So we often get inquiries and proposals of projects, and yeah, we love it.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So I know we've discussed a lot of what's already in the museum, but is there anything maybe missing from what's on display that you'd like to see introduced?
Yeah, I think for us, it's not necessarily about acquiring more specimens because we have a huge number of specimens, particularly of pathology specimens. But in that vein, what we are looking at, we've been spending about the last 5 years with a sort of a reduced number of specimens on display. In Melbourne, they've been building a brand new train station, an underground train station, right in front of our building. So that they started doing that just when I started about 5 years ago. So we've had to take, all the specimens that are sort of, irreplaceable or susceptible to vibration. They've all been in storage for the past 5 years. So there's this huge number of specimens that I'm dying to put on display or to use, incorporate in our displays that have been in the basement for the last 5 years. So that yeah we're not sort of looking for new specimens. We just want to show the ones that we already have, and it's going to be so exciting when they finally give us the go ahead. And I've been operating for the last 5 years with just a fraction of the specimens that we actually have access to in the collection. So it's super exciting to think about sort of reinventing that space and revamping the displays. But also really daunting to be like, oh my God, it's finally going to actually happen after about 5 years. We're really going to be able to do something with just such a much broader group of specimens. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely. You might need a new building to make space for it all.
Yes, yeah. Well, they're always talking about a new building. Hopefully that will happen at some point. I don't know. We're not holding our breath, but they keep telling us that we'll get a new building one day. So yeah, but that's then we might have sort of we'll do the revamp, and then we'll do another one for the next building. I don't know. That's fine. Whatever they throw at us, we'll put something. We'll make something beautiful in there.
Absolutely. It's all very exciting. Well,
It is, yeah.
yeah.
Right.
So we've just about come to the end of all my questions, but is there anything else that we've not discussed yet that you think our readers would like to know about?
It might be a good opportunity to plug our online catalog. So that all that work I was talking about on the database, that was also, I mean, one of the driving forces for that was that we were developing an online database. So we do have that accessible to the pub. That is accessible to the public. It's a sort of a subset of our collection that is there are a couple of human tissue specimens there, but they're mostly models, casts, other related specimens and objects, and that is accessible to anybody who is interested in looking at it. Which I should really know the URL. I'd suggest if you Google the Harry Brooks Allen Museum of Anatomy and Pathology, you will find our online collections, and you can see sort of a bit of a subset of what we have, along with our sister museum, the Medical History Museum and the Dental Museum from the Melbourne Medical Faculty. So we're really, really proud of that. And there's just it's a beautiful site and lets you sort of just have a nice look through our collections and what we have.
Amazing. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Rohan. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
No worries. Thanks for asking me.